The cold case finally solved by Google Maps. The picture looked ordinary at first, just a quiet neighborhood in Florida, a stretch of green grass, and a small pond glistening under the sun. But then, someone noticed it. Just beneath the surface of that pond, faintly visible in the satellite image on Google Maps, was the outline of something strange, something shaped like a car. The moment that image went viral in 2019, everything changed. Police rushed to the scene, and a crowd gathered behind the yellow tape, whispering and pointing toward the water. Divers stepped into the murky pond, their movements slow and careful. Minutes turned into hours, and tension filled the air. Finally, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, a dull metallic shape emerged from the depths. The water shimmered around it. The car had been there for decades, hidden in plain sight, unnoticed by thousands of people who had passed by. As the vehicle was pulled from the pond, one question echoed among everyone watching. Who was inside? When investigators pried open the door, the air filled with the smell of rust and decay. Inside, in the driver's seat, were human remains, a skeleton still buckled in place. Nearby lay a set of car keys, a faded wallet, and an old-style flip phone, now crusted with mud. Moments later, police confirmed what no one expected to hear. The remains belonged to William Moldt, a man who had disappeared 22 years earlier, in 1997. The mystery that had haunted his family for over 2 decades was suddenly staring everyone in the face. But as detectives soon learned, the story of how he ended up there wasn't simple, and Google Maps had just revealed the first clue in a much larger puzzle. That night, news cameras filled the small Florida town. Neighbors gathered, still shaken. Some had lived in the area since the 90s and remembered the posters, William's face smiling from missing person flyers taped to grocery store doors. Others whispered that they'd seen the pond 100 times, but never realized what was beneath it. The truth had been sitting just below the surface, quite literally. Back in 1997, William Moldt wasn't the kind of man people expected to vanish. He was 40 years old, worked as a mortgage broker, and lived a quiet life. He wasn't known to party hard or get into trouble. That November evening, he went out to a nightclub for a night with friends. Witnesses said he didn't drink much, just a few drinks, and that he left alone, calling his girlfriend to say he was on his way home. He sounded calm, normal, nothing unusual. But William never made it home. When his girlfriend reported him missing the next morning, police began searching immediately. His white 1994 Saturn SL disappeared with him. There were no skid marks, no signs of foul play, and no witnesses who saw him drive away. He had simply vanished, like the earth had swallowed him whole. Weeks passed, then months, then years. The investigation grew cold. His family held out hope that one day, he might walk through the door or call from some faraway place. But deep down, they knew something wasn't right. Detectives scoured nearby roads, canals, and ponds but found nothing. They assumed he had either run away or been the victim of foul play. There was no closure, no body, no car. Just silence. Over time, life in that Florida neighborhood moved on. Houses were built, lawns were manicured, and families played near the same pond that quietly held the secret. The once muddy, undeveloped area became a suburban community, with paved driveways and mailboxes lining the streets. Nobody knew that beneath the calm surface of that water lay the answer to a 22-year-old mystery. Then, 2 decades later, everything changed. In 2019, a man was browsing Google Maps, simply exploring his old neighborhood from his computer, when he zoomed in on a familiar pond near Moon Bay Circle in Wellington, Florida. He noticed something strange in the satellite image, the faint outline of a car under the water. At first, he thought it might be a trick of light. But the more he looked, the more it looked like a real vehicle. Curious, he mentioned it to a friend who still lived nearby. That friend decided to check it out in person using a drone. When the drone hovered above the pond, the image became undeniable. There was a car submerged beneath the surface. He immediately called the police. When the authorities arrived, they realized this wasn't just any vehicle. After retrieving the car and running the plates, they confirmed it belonged to none other than William Moldt, the man who had been missing since 1997. For his family, The news hit like a storm. On one hand, there was relief. They finally knew what had happened. On the other hand, there was heartbreak. For more than 2 decades, they had imagined every possible outcome, but none had included something so hauntingly ordinary: a car, hidden in plain sight, just a few feet from where new families lived and children played. Detectives began piecing together what might have happened that night. The bar William visited was just a short drive from his home, and the road passed directly by the pond. It was late, and the area was still under development at the time, dark, with few streetlights and uneven terrain. The theory was simple yet tragic. William had lost control of his car and driven straight into the pond. The steep drop-off and muddy banks made it nearly impossible for anyone to see the car once it sank below the surface. For years, the pond remained undisturbed. When the neighborhood was later developed, no one suspected that a missing man's car rested just below their feet. But what made the story even more eerie was how it was discovered. It wasn't a detective, a private investigator, or even a tip from a witness. It was a random glance on Google Maps, an everyday technology that had become a modern-day magnifying glass for mysteries. As the investigation continued, police carefully documented every piece of evidence recovered from the car. The rusted remains of the Saturn told its story silently. The cracked glass, the faded interior, and the worn seatbelt still fastened across the driver's seat. It was as if time had stopped the moment it hit the water. The small Florida pond, which had reflected sunlight for years without suspicion, had been keeping its secret faithfully until technology caught up. Reporters from across the country arrived to cover the story. Headlines read, "Google Maps solves 22-year mystery and man found after 2 decades thanks to satellite image." The discovery reignited public fascination with cold cases, sparking hope that other missing persons might someday be found in similar ways. But as William's story came back to light, a new question began to grow among investigators and locals alike. Why had it taken so long? How could no one have seen it before? And was there more to the story than just a tragic accident? Because some residents remembered something odd about that night in 1997. A loud sound, perhaps like tires screeching or a splash, but when they had looked, there was nothing to see. And though the evidence seemed to point to a simple crash, some details didn't line up neatly. If William had been driving straight home, why had his car ended up on that side of the pond? Why had no trace ever been found, even when the area was searched by police during the initial investigation? As detectives reviewed the old case files, they discovered something even more puzzling. There had been reports of strange lights and noises around that pond in the weeks following his disappearance. People had brushed them off at the time, assuming it was wildlife or nearby construction. But now, those old reports suddenly seemed more important. Could it be that someone had known the car was there all along and kept it a secret? The thought sent chills through the investigators. As the sun set on that Florida neighborhood, police floodlights illuminated the pond where the car had been pulled out. The ripples faded, the water stilled, but the questions only grew deeper. And somewhere between the calm reflection of the water and the glow of the streetlights, a quiet unease settled over the community, as if the pond itself still had more to tell. The case that Google Maps had cracked open was far from over. The night after the discovery, the pond was quiet again, but the neighborhood wasn't. News vans lined the street, lights flashing, cameras rolling, and reporters whispering into microphones about the Google Maps mystery. Inside the police command tent, detectives went over every detail. The pond had been drained, the car photographed, and the remains sent to the medical examiner. But the more they examined, the more questions surfaced. Something about the scene didn't feel like a simple accident. Detective Laura Jenkins, who had been a rookie cop when William Moldt first went missing in 1997, stared at the case file on her desk. "I was here when it happened," she said quietly. "Back then, we searched everything, or so we thought." Her partner, Detective Morales, tapped a pen on the edge of the report. "You ever drive by that pond back then?" "Hundreds of times," she said. "But you couldn't see anything. It's like the earth swallowed him whole." But something else nagged at Laura's mind: the direction of the car. The vehicle had been found nose down, but facing away from the road William was supposed to take home. That didn't make sense. If he lost control, the car should have gone straight into the pond, not curved around the far side. It looked intentional. Could someone have pushed him? Morales asked quietly. Laura didn't answer right away. She flipped through the old witness statements. One report caught her eye. A man from a nearby house who had called 911 in 1997 about a loud splash around 9:45 p.m. Police had responded, but they hadn't found anything unusual. The report had been filed and forgotten. Until now. The next morning, divers returned to the pond, searching the surrounding mud for tire marks, footprints, anything that might explain how the car ended up where it did. What they found only deepened the mystery. The slope into the pond was far too steep for someone unfamiliar with it to drive down accidentally. Even more strange, a piece of broken fence near the back edge looked newer than it should have for something untouched since 1997. Could be storm damage, one officer suggested. Or, Laura said, someone went back there more recently than we think. Meanwhile, the medical examiner's report came in. The skeletal remains were confirmed as William Moldt through dental records. But there were unusual findings, no fractures from impact, no signs that he'd braced for a crash. The seatbelt was still fastened, yes, but the position of his arms suggested he hadn't been holding the steering wheel when the car hit the water. So, how had the car gone in? Back in 1997, William's last known movements were simple. He left the club at 9:30 p.m., called his girlfriend at 9:40, and said he was heading home. His house was only about 15 minutes away. The pond was directly along that route. Detectives retraced his drive that night. The old nightclub was gone, replaced by a pharmacy. The once dark road was now lined with new homes, streetlights, and signs. But the geography remained. The curve near the pond was sharp, and if William had been speeding or distracted, he could have easily gone off the road. That was what investigators had believed for years. Yet now, with the angle of the car, the unbroken seatbelt, and the lack of visible damage, something didn't fit. Laura leaned over the hood of a patrol car, staring at an aerial map. If he went off the road here, she said, pointing, he'd have hit the pond straight on. But this path curves around the back. The only way he could have ended up there is if he entered from the service road behind the development. Morales frowned. But that road didn't exist in 1997. Exactly. That meant the car had either moved somehow over the years, impossible without anyone noticing, or someone had driven it there after the fact. The local news ran headlines that night. Was William Moldt's death really an accident? Theories exploded online. Some claimed foul play. Others thought the car had slowly sunk deeper over time, its final position distorted. But then, another strange clue appeared. A retired construction worker named Alan Pierce came forward after seeing the story on TV. He said he'd worked on the housing development near Moon Bay Circle back in the early 2000s. While clearing the lot near the pond, he remembered something odd. The ground had felt unusually soft in one section, almost like it had been disturbed. The crew filled it in and paved over it, assuming it was just unstable soil. But now, seeing the satellite image, he wasn't so sure. That pond wasn't supposed to be that deep, he told detectives. We thought it was runoff, but the way it sloped, it looked man-made. Man-made. Laura repeated. Pierce nodded. We were told not to dig too close to it. The developers said there were drainage pipes under there. But thinking back, I never saw any. Detectives pulled the old development permits and found something else that raised eyebrows. No record of the pond's exact excavation date. Somehow, the paperwork was missing. If the pond had been modified or expanded after William's disappearance, it could explain why no one ever found the car. But it also raised a darker question. Had someone known it was there and chosen to cover it up? The next day, police brought in ground-penetrating radar to scan the area around the pond. Beneath layers of soil, they found remnants of what looked like old tire ruts leading from a dirt path, one that would have existed before the houses were built. The tracks stopped exactly where the car was found. That night, Laura couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at photos of William's car being pulled from the pond. His skeletonized hand still rested near the steering wheel. His life had ended just a few miles from safety. But what if he hadn't been alone that night? She reopened the bar records from 1997. One name stood out, a bartender named Rick Thompson. He'd served William his last drink and was among the last to see him alive. Back then, Thompson had told police that William seemed fine, maybe a little tired, but not drunk. He'd said goodbye, watched him walk out, and thought nothing of it. But when Laura looked into Thompson's background, she found that he'd moved away 2 years after the disappearance, to another city just north of Wellington. When she ran his name through police databases, something popped up. 2 arrests for assault, one involving a road rage incident. She exhaled slowly. Coincidence or not? Detectives tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. Now in his 50s, Thompson looked surprised to see them. "This about Moldt?" he asked almost casually. Laura nodded. "We just found his car." He leaned back, silent for a moment. "After all these years, you're telling me he was right there?" "Right there," she said. "In the pond behind the new neighborhood." He looked away. "That's unreal." But as the interview went on, small cracks appeared in his story. He claimed William had left the bar around 9:30. But phone records showed William called his girlfriend at 9:40, a 10-minute gap that didn't make sense. And when asked whether anyone had followed him out that night, Thompson paused just a little too long. When Laura pressed further, he grew defensive. "Look, it was a long time ago. I don't remember every detail." But she noticed something, a flicker in his eyes, a tightening of his jaw, when she mentioned the pond. "Did you ever drive that road back then?" she asked. "No," he said too quickly. By the time Thompson left, the detectives had more suspicions than answers. They couldn't prove anything yet, no fingerprints, no witnesses. But the timing, the location, and the silence all felt connected. Meanwhile, William's family struggled to process the discovery. His sister, Carol, visited the pond, laying flowers near the spot where his car had been pulled out. "He was right here all this time," she whispered. "All this time, and we never knew." That moment, captured by a news crew, became the image that defined the story, the collision of grief, relief, and unanswered questions. In the following weeks, as forensic teams combed through the evidence, a discovery in the car's glove compartment changed everything again. Tucked inside a rusted plastic sleeve was a small notebook, waterlogged but partially readable. It contained notes from the night William vanished. The last entry read, "Heading home now. Feeling watched." The ink trailed off, the rest smeared away by years underwater. Detectives exchanged a long look. "Feeling watched." The words were simple, but they changed everything. Suddenly, the idea of a simple car accident seemed far less likely. Someone had been following William Moldt that night. The pond had hidden his car for 22 years. But it seemed it might still be hiding the truth. And as the team prepared to dig deeper into the old connections, the bar, the people he saw that night, and the land development that covered the pond, one chilling thought loomed over them all. If someone had kept this secret buried for more than 2 decades, were they still out there watching? To be continued.